All right, without further ado, let's dive into marine protected areas. And it is my pleasure to introduce Penny Owens, Community and Education Outreach Director. Penny has led Channelkeeper's education programs since 2004. She manages Channelkeeper's single-use plastic reduction initiative and the Marine Protected Area Watch Program. Prior to her work as Santa Barbara Channelkeeper, Penny has worked as an educator for several organizations and as a research diver in California's Kelp Forest. She has a bachelor's degree in biology and environmental studies from UC Santa Cruz. Penny's knowledge of marine and coastal ecosystems is a natural complement to her diverse field experiences in environmental education. In her free time, she enjoys the outdoors, oceans, and mountains, and being among plants. Thank you so much for joining us, Penny.
Thanks so much for having me, Sam. All right, we're gonna get started here. I'm just gonna share my screen. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I'm really excited to be here. Again, my name is Penny with Santa Barbara Channelkeeper. And if you don't know us, we are a local environmental group that works to protect and restore the channel and its watersheds through science-based advocacy, education, monitoring, and enforcement. And oops, next slide, please. I just tried to forward my own slides. I think it's gonna scroll for you. Perfect, thanks, Sam. So our history, we were founded back in 1999 as a program of the Environmental Defense Center, a local law firm here in town. And we became an independent 501c nonprofit in 2001. We're part of the Waterkeeper movement, and all waterkeepers work to protect and restore their local waterways and watersheds. And we're also part of the California Coastkeeper Alliance, which is an alliance of coastkeeper programs in California that works together for water issues along the coast, inland, and they work also in Sacramento on statewide policies. Next slide, please. So today we're here to take a virtual dive into our MPAs, and I'm really excited to share with you some of the videos we have of some of our local treasures, as we have some beautiful places to explore here along our coast, and we're really blessed. But to take a step back, we just want to look at MPAs, and Sam already gave this a quick introduction, but what are MPAs, Marine Protected Areas? Some folks like to call them underwater parks, and I'd just like to say happy Underwater Parks Day to everybody. That's the event we're here celebrating today. And Sylvia Earle also calls them hope spots. And what you can see in this map here is all the red dots indicate marine protected areas worldwide. And they look like different things, but the basic idea behind a marine protected area is that you protect and conserve marine life. You limit or prohibit some of the extractive activities, and non-consumptive activities like recreational swimming and snorkeling and surfing and kayaking and diving are typically not regulated at all. And really what they're looking to do is protect the whole ecosystem rather than just individual species or organisms like our local fisheries are managed here in the States. Next slide. So are MPAs effective? Based on a global review of marine reserves worldwide, we see significant increases in biomass, density, the size of the animals, diversity increases, and as you might expect, the species that are most heavily fished are the ones that we see the most dramatic increases in. Next slide, please. So here in California, back in 1999, our state legislatures adopted the Marine Life Protection Act. And that act had many goals, but it mandated that California establish a network of marine protected areas. And so what the state did, it was a public-private partnership, was they divided California into several regions, and then they had a stakeholder process where they invited everyone to the table. So that's conservationists, scientists, fishermen, recreational fishermen, commercial fishermen, all the users. And it was a compromise process. And as you can probably imagine, at times it was a little contentious, but ultimately a network was adopted throughout the state, with the Channel Islands being the first set of MPAs that were adopted back in 2003. They moved up the coast after that, and then further north after that. And then they came down here to Southern California. It was called the South Coast. And that region was Point Conception all the way to the border of Mexico. So a very densely populated, heavily used region. It took a little bit longer, but the MPAs were adopted at the end of 2010, and our Southern California MPAs went into effect January 1, 2012. Next slide, please. And this slide's really just to illustrate along the Central Coast how the MPAs work as a network. So for fish and other invertebrate organisms, there's no fences. They can swim where they please, and many of these organisms are what we call broadcast spawners. And so that means they release their reproductive material into the oceans, and fertilization happens while it's floating around. Currents move those larvae around, and they can populate areas both inside that marine protected area, as well as reefs and ecosystems outside of those protected areas. And so that's what this graphic is just kind of demonstrating, how the MPAs work as a network. Next slide, please. So here in California, we have 3 different types of MPAs. State marine reserves, where all fishing and take of any kind is prohibited. State marine parks, where some recreational fishing is allowed. And then state marine conservation areas. And pretty much each state marine conservation area has its own set of regulations. And there's no-take state marine conservation areas to some that allow recreational spearfishing. And we'll talk about some of those examples shortly here, to some that allow both a little bit of rec fishing as well as commercial fishing. So those are our 3 types of marine protected areas here in California. Next slide, please. So here's the map, and Channelkeeper has several of these maps available also. So if anyone would like to get their hands on one, I'm sure that the Sea Center and the museum also have copies of the maps as well. And one thing to note when you're looking at these maps, this is not an official California Department of Fish and Wildlife map. However, we followed their same mapping protocols, if you will. And if you see red on the map for marine protected areas here in California, that indicates a state marine reserve. So that's a no-take marine reserve. If you see the purple, those are state marine conservation areas that are no-take. And then if you see the blue MPAs, those are state marine conservation areas that allow some form of take. And each one is different. So it's important to know where you are and what types of fishing activity is allowed there. But you can really see here how Point Conception connects to the MPAs on the islands. We have some coastal ones, connects over to Malibu at Point Dume, then uses Catalina, Santa Barbara Island, Palos Verdes there to connect through then to Orange County and then down to San Diego. So this is how the Southern California MPAs look. Next slide, please. Alrighty, it's time for our tour. So we're gonna do a little bit of a tour of the MPA, how to get there in case anyone needs to know, some of the topside fun recreation opportunities available, and then we'll dive a little deeper into some of our underwater videos. So first up, we're gonna visit the Campus Point Marine Protected Area, and that's that one. Thank you, Sam. It's the largest one in our coastal region, and it stretches from the Goleta coastline to Campus Point, and it includes Coal Oil Point and Devereaux Slough. This MPA represents a wide diversity of habitats, including eelgrass, surf grass, shallow intertidal, rocky reef with kelp forest, oil seeps, and some sandy bottoms habitat with eelgrass as well. The tide pools at Coal Oil Point, which is where our dive map will take us today too, are listed as one of the within the top 10 tide pools in MPAs in California to explore, and they're very accessible. You can see that this MPA extends all the way out to the border of that beige kind of bubble there. That beige is indicating the border of the end of state waters. So state waters extend 3 miles offshore. So this MPA is a no-take marine conservation area that extends from the middle of the rocks at Campus Point all the way to partway through Elwood Mesa. If anyone's familiar, Santa Barbara Shores Drive is an access point at Elwood Mesa. And if you just walk straight out, and there's a little bit of a treacherous drainage, you can kind of hike down to the beach there. That's basically the western border of the MPA there. And then it extends 3 miles offshore. And I forgot to mention, it also includes oil seeps. And if you look just above the T in the no take for the square miles, that's Platform Holly, just to give you a reference when you're out walking the beach there. It's well outside of the MPA. Next slide. So here's just a little bit info for folks who may want to access the area. I'm happy to share there are some bus access points with the city MTD where you can walk down to some of the beaches. Campus Point is a fantastic family beach. There's a fun little couple spots to surf there, as well as around the corner at Depressions. Isla Vista has a bunch of access points as well. And then in my opinion, the gem of this MPA is really Coal Oil Point, both on the shore for the tide pools and also underwater when we take a tour. Next slide, please. So when you visit the MPA, there's a bunch of recreation opportunities. You can rent kayaks both at Campus Point Beach. I'm not sure of the update on COVID, and also with Paddle Sports Center over at Goleta Beach. You might see a friendly harbor seal. We'll see many of these in the videos I'm sharing. And just one of my favorites, the egret standing on the canopy of the kelp, hunting, and just it's a beautiful, beautiful kayak. Next slide. And here is a good winter low tide. And I mean, just gorgeous relief, stunning tide pools, heavily researched and studied by researchers, both at UCSB as well as federal and state agencies. You can find everything here, you know, mussel beds, barnacles, that's a great blue heron hunting, the surf grass, all kinds of invertebrates, snails, crabs, sea hares, maybe if you're lucky, some sea stars that are recovering from the wasting disease. And if you're really lucky, maybe even an abalone or two. Next slide, please. And here's one of our ochre sea stars at the, oh, that was good. And I just wanted to make a plug. There's a fun, it is a screen, and I know we're all looking for ways to sometimes get away from screens and take breaks, but there's a really fun nature app called iNaturalist. And there's a way that you can visit tide pools and take photos of organisms that you know, species of interest, and also ones you don't know, and have experts help ID the organisms you're looking at. And it's just a fun way to kind of design your own treasure hunt. And there's even some organizations that organize statewide, they call them a bio blitz, and they send folks out to the tide pools to try to take interesting photos of all the different organisms in the tide pools. So kind of a fun way if you have a way to make sure your phone is safe in the tide pool. It's not really something I should do. I'm a phone dropper, but it is a fun way to kind of engage and learn a little bit more about what you're looking at. All righty. Next up, we're gonna take the plunge. So this is a dive map that Channelkeeper created after many, many dives to Coal Oil Point. And actually my coworker, Ben Piddley, this was his idea. He was thinking about how we could help share some of the beauty of our marine protected areas and the diving spots, what it looks like underwater, and share the beauty and the importance of why we should protect them. And so what we would do is we would go diving, and we would bring our clipboards with us, and then we would bring a bag of pelican buoys. And so they're just this like buoy with a bunch of line and a weight on it. And so we could drop one at like one edge of an interesting feature and at the other end. And then we would usually drop between 5 or 6 per dive. And then we'd go up and change tanks, and we'd go with our boat and mark those GPS coordinates so we could help create like a kind of like ground truthing a map. So I won't lie, it was a lot of fun to make these maps, and it was a lot of work too, but we're really excited with how they turned out. And while we were down, we were just noting species of interest and taking notes on the depth and all kinds of different information. So you can see Coal Oil Point is accessible from shore. I wouldn't recommend it in the winter per se. Right now, we've got some great swell running, and it'd be pretty exciting out there. But on a nice calm summer day, we can actually get pretty stellar visibility there, and it's a short snorkel out to some of the interesting features that are in about 15 to 20 feet of water. So you can see right offshore, the reef kind of runs east to west there. But then as you move further offshore, it kind of starts to turn and take more of that north-south heading. Some, thanks Sam, you're doing awesome. Some of the fun features are over there on Bubble Ridge, there's some seeps where you can see actual bubbles. Penny's Hat Parkway is just a play you'll see shortly, what we were referring to there. And then there's even some spots at the next reef off San Juan Mesa Lane where you can actually see some tar seeps coming out of the area, naturally out of the ground. So really interesting geologic happenings down there too. All right, we're ready to dive in. Next slide. So our diving here, you know, some of our dives were in the summer, so it was a little bit warmer than it would be right now. There we go. And our water is a little green offshore, not quite as clear as the islands if we have any island divers here. But I will say, don't rule out Coil Point. It really blew me away. Quite a lot of diverse, different species of fish. The relief on the rocky reef, the substrate, the distance from like the bottom to the top creates great surface area for all kinds of encrusting invertebrates. This here is one of my favorites, the sea hare, just a little strange algae grazer. There's our little highway, parkway we called it. This area was heavily fished, both recreationally and commercially for lobsters. And it's interesting to see how densely populated some of the areas are. And here we could see those were some barred sand bass. Those were this bubble, some of the seeps. And you can just see diverse species of fish, shovel-nosed guitarfish. It's a really neat dive. And as you move off of that point, you move more into some of the flatter, less diverse reef system, but it's still interesting. So some kelp bass snacking on a dead sheep crab there. And some more barred sand bass there. Really interesting dive. In the summer months, we even saw, you know, yellowtail and some other species of interest as well. So that was Coal Oil Point within the Campus Point State Marine Protected Area. And we're gonna move up the coast just a little bit here to one of my favorite places along the Gaviota coastline, the Naples property and the Naples State Marine Conservation Area. So you can see this MPA is quite a bit smaller. It's only about 2.6 square miles. And it does not extend out to the state water border at 3 miles offshore. It only extends about 1.5 miles offshore. And it starts, for those of you who walk this area of the coastline, the eastern border is just past Driftwoods there. And then the western border is just before you get to the private beach at Dos Pueblos Ranch. If you notice, there's that dense area offshore, the red and the green kind of in the middle in the MPA, Sam. Yeah, that was some fishing substrate. That right there is the high point. That's a rocky reef. And that's what we're going to look at with the dive map here in a minute. It's about 1.25 miles offshore. So not so accessible by, that'd be a long swim, much more accessible by boat. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so the easiest access point for Naples is to head over to the Bacara Public Access to Haskell's Beach. Hike down that trail and then head west along the beach. Do want to note that you need a good low tide for this. There's kind of a pinch point right by the Haskell's Pier, which is an old oil service pier. And you really need the tide, I would say about 2.5 feet or lower. So just keep your eye on the incoming tide when you do the walk. It's one of my favorite walks to do in the winter months. And there's some great, I've snorkeled just offshore there. It's a popular surfing site, a popular kayaking area. And the Naples dive flag indicates that offshore reef pinnacle that we're gonna visit here in a second. Next slide, please. So here's some of the stunning rocky reef. This was just from a few weeks ago when I was up there. And it's just so neat to see it change through the seasons as the sand shift. There's just incredible rock exposure and rock reef. You can find all kinds of encrusting invertebrates, octopus. Next slide, please. This is kind of to the west there, and this is going to the east at another really good low tide just a few weeks ago as well. You can really see that exposed surf grass, the algae, and we're looking east here towards Coil Point, actually. Next slide. Definitely recommend the site to check out. And then here, if you look carefully, you can see some of the exposed rock, our little buddy, the sea star there, some surf grass, all different kinds of red and brown and green algae, and some of the exposed surf grass flats behind it. It's just a stunning spot. It's also a harbor seal haul out and an important area for our indigenous Chumash folks as well. Next slide. So this is the first dive map that we made, and this is a really neat pinnacle reef that comes up from a depth of about 50, 60 feet up to a point. And the shallow spot is indicated, thanks Sam, about 15 to 20 feet, depending on the tide. And there's some GPS coordinates provided if you have your own vessel to safely get out there. It is really best explored, I would say, by diving, but one could snorkel. And you can see here, this map indicates where it's going. North is due north is up. And as we take a tour today, we're gonna start on the western edge and kind of work our way east, and then we'll jump over towards E, the bookshelves, and we'll circle around a really neat, slightly offshore structures that we made up these names, Strawberry Bowl, and a little double arch system as well. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so here we are just looking at some of the beautiful, you can really see that exposed rocky reef and just how the depth, the varying levels of depth there. So that provides a lot of surface area for all types of organisms, from encrusting invertebrates, algae, fish, juvenile fish species, residents. This is a state marine conservation area that allows for the recreational spearfishing, but of pelagic fin fish species only. And so that's your yellowtail or your white-tailed sea bass. So that means all the buddies that hang out in the kelp forest all the time, like your kelp bass or your cabezon or your lingcod, those are not allowed to be taken. So you can really see some of that beautiful red algae and coralline algae, just schools of fish everywhere. It's partially because it's a little further offshore and the adjacent area is very rural. It's we see better water visibility. I believe there should be a few more videos coming up next too. And so that helps lend the good visibility that we see there at Naples. And now we've swum east, if you will, with me. This is probably one of my favorite spots at the site. It's about 20 feet from bottom to top of this rock structure. You can see there's like multiple levels. That was why we named it Bookshelf. And it's fun. I would recommend to scuba divers, bring a light with you so you can explore all the different algae and strawberry anemones. And you never know who's going to be hanging out in some of those crevices and cracks. Get in there. Sometimes we recruit folks with big cameras and lights to help us out. So here's some more of the resident rockfish. You can see some specific spiny lobsters, gorgonians, beautiful anemones. And we'll circle around here and I just love the rock, how covered the rock is with life. I learned to dive in warm water, but I've clearly been converted to the California and the temperate waters. And then our next little video that's gonna run here is gonna just take a look. We're just kind of continuing a little further offshore, a little deeper to the reef. We didn't find this little neat feature until we'd been diving quite a bit in the area and taking note with our GPS float, using the floats and mapping out what the reef looked like. So here we are, there's strawberry anemones, Coreonactis, just covering the rock. And an interesting thing about Naples Reef too is that it's been heavily studied by researchers. Both researchers from UCSB's PSCO and LTER lab, as well as researchers throughout the state and West Coast. Here's our buddy, the sheephead, swimming through the arches. They're not big enough for a human with a tank on to swim through. I didn't try, but I wouldn't have fit. But just a really beautiful feature there. And then the ever-friendly harbor seal. So definitely a spot worth recommending if you have a means to get out there and explore Naples. And now we're gonna take a pretty big jump here. And we're gonna head about 22 miles south and a little bit east to the smallest of our offshore northern Channel Islands that make up both the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary and the Channel Islands National Park. And we're going to take a look at Anacapa Island. There's 2 MPAs there. The red one is the State Marine Reserve. And then the blue on West Anacapa is a state marine conservation area that allows for some take. It allows for recreational take of spiny lobster, as well as some commercial take of the lobster there as well. And you'll see these MPAs actually extend past state water line at 3 miles offshore into federal waters. So that's the FMR you see on the map, this Federal Marine Reserve. And that's in part because of the National Marine Sanctuary designation out there. Next slide, please. So Channel Islands is often, and all of the Channel Islands collectively are considered, some like to call them the Galapagos of the North America for their diversity. And Anacapa Island is certainly one of the jewels of our Northern Galapagos, our Northern Channel Islands. That archway is the iconic, it's the symbol of the national park. And that's on the furthest eastern point of the island. And you can actually visit the island with island packers, and you can camp when camping is allowed. I don't believe we can camp there right now with COVID shutdowns, but it's a unique island. It's pretty, like, it's being on a rock in the middle of the ocean. It's pretty fun to visit. Next slide, please. The Western Gull's Nest here. And this is a beautiful shot from the spring with, you can see the touch of green from some rains and the coreopsis blooming. And this is from Eastern Anacapa looking towards Middle Anacapa. And then you can see West Anacapa there in the background. And the dive sites we're going to look at, next slide, please, are primarily on Middle Anacapa and Eastern Anacapa. So just to orient you, you can look in the lower corner here, and that's the outline, left corner, sorry, of Anacapa Island. So we're gonna basically today look at a couple sites on the State Marine Conservation Area going from west to east. So we're gonna look first at Keyhole Rock, then we're gonna jump over to Ray Cove, and then we'll cruise over to Cathedral Cove. And if anyone's gone out with some of our dive outfitters in the area, you most likely have dove in several of these dive sites. And on a good calm day, they can just be magical. And so with our dive map here, there weren't as many defining features like we found at Naples and Coil Point. And so you're seeing some of Ben's sketches of what the sites look like in a little more detail between the cobble and the boulders. So let's dive in, Sam. Video, please. So here's how this site gets the name. You can see that Keyhole Rock. And this is a neat site. You can start off closer to the island with a bunch of rocky reef, all kinds of encrusting algae and coralline algae, kelp growing from the rock to the surface. We had our state marine fish there, some spiny lobsters. There's just a lot of crevices and cracks to explore. I don't think you can dive at Anacapa Island without several friendly harbor seal encounters. And here you can really see how the kelp attaches to the rock reef and reaches to the surface. And we went a little further offshore because many years ago, Channelkeeper was involved with some eelgrass restoration, and that grows in sandy bottoms, where you might find our friend here, the horn shark, a little shy. One of my favorite sea slugs, the Navanax. And if you keep swimming offshore away from the island, you'll reach the seagrass beds. So this is eelgrass. It's a true flowering plant that lives in the ocean. And it is essential fish habitat. And you can find all kinds of organisms in there, including this beautiful leopard shark. Some fish will lay their eggs in the bottom, all different kinds of kelp bass, surf perch, bat rays, all kinds of neat invertebrates too. There's even a sea slug, a nudibranch, that is this exact color green and only found on eelgrass. And so you can really see some of the different fish. So we just wanted to give a shout out to the eelgrass beds. Now we're gonna swim a little to our east over to Ray Cove. And as the name implies, we're gonna hope to see some bat rays here. So you kind of tuck up right up against the island here, and you can see it's pretty stunning rock walls when you dive in, right where like the ocean goes right up against the island there. And it's really peaceful to just sit there and watch the fish and everybody swim by and the algae move. And we didn't always get the best days. That it can be even more clear than this. But we got some pretty good visibility days out there. And this site has less like defining individual large rock features and just lots of large cobble and larger boulders. So it's really fun to swim around the boulders and explore, poking around, looking at all the different fish. Here's our big sheephead again. Looks like we have our steep marine fish lurking in the background there, Garibaldi. As a big male swimming by. And this is a state marine reserve, so no fishing, and it seems like they know. And thankfully, a bat ray. Whew. We saw several bat ray in Ray Cove, and we did not give this one site this was its name. And we also got a real quick, you can't even see it there, but a quick look at the white sea bass, who are a little flighty with bubbles. That's why most folks would, when you hunt for them, you have to spearfish. But schools of fish, just the Anacapa State Marine Reserve just teeming with life, and some more bat rays. And what you start to see here is one of my favorite things about diving in the kelp forest is just that when the sun rays come through the water and the kelp kind of sparkles golden. Alrighty, in our last exploration here, we're going to jump a little bit further east, but not all the way, to Cathedral Cove, which is another gem at Anacapa Island. And you can see that little rock you saw there. When you dive in, you can swim towards the rock or the island and explore the kelp forest here. And just again, beautiful rocky reef, some coralline algae. Opal eyes like to pose for the cameras there. Little juvenile, you can just see the blue iridescent. And there is some sand to explore there too. So if you wanted to look for, just looking, but you could look for halibut or bat rays, and there's some patchy eelgrass there as well. Some more of our surf perch. And now a kelp surf perch. And there's a lot of sites here that are very accessible for snorkeling also, not just scuba diving like some of our other sites. One of my favorite fish, the giant kelp fish, some of the juveniles hanging out there. And you can just get a sense, nice clear water, beautiful kelp forest. Lots of juvenile fish. This was in towards the late summer, early fall. So that's one of the best times to go diving out there at the Channel Islands. Some more of our bait fish. And that's gonna wrap up here shortly our tour today of the some of the MPAs. Our virtual dive. I miss diving. I haven't been diving in a while either, thanks to COVID. And we'll just, I think I just had a wrap up slide. So we're gonna share our website where you can check out more videos of the MPAs that we visited. We're happy to share the dive maps, both the map with all the MPAs as well as the dive maps that we created. And I'm going to hand it back to Sam. So thanks again, everyone, for bearing with us. And my apologies again for that technical issue. But thanks for bearing with us.
We got it, and it worked great in the end, so it's all good. And so it looks like we do have a couple of questions. One that's in the Q&A box is from Craig. He said, I noticed San Nicolas and Clemente don't have any MPAs. Is this because they're already off limits due to naval bases?
That's a great question. You know, I don't recall the reasoning behind the MPA placement and the not placement at those particular sites, but I have a feeling that those two are both heavily used by military, and that probably played a role in that.
Great. And so that is all the questions in the Q&A chat box. And now I'm going to kick it over to Stephanie, who's been monitoring our chat for any questions that have come in. So I'll let Stephanie answer those ones.
Yeah, so Penny, there were a couple of questions. One was, what were the blue water drop icons that were in one of the original maps that you shared? It was like Campus Point.
Oh, yep. Yep, those were indicating oil seeps, natural oil seeps. So we have a lot of those in the area. And I mean, that point there was named Coal Oil Point. And anyone who does nice long beach walks has seen the seasonal variation with shifting sands over the seeps. And there's actually, we get a lot of questions about those at Channelkeeper, and there's some really interesting research happening at UCSB on them as well. But they are a natural part of the area and part of why we have the rigs offshore here.
Definitely. So let's see, you touched on this a little bit, but maybe just reiterate, can you give suggestions on safe ways to approach and enjoy the tide pools?
Oh, you know, I didn't go into that as much as I wanted, because I wanted to thank you for whoever was asking that. You know, our tide pools, especially in our protected areas and really everywhere, they're severely impacted by all visitors. And so one of the things we like to ask folks that visit the tide pools is to visit them as carefully as you can. So to look where you're stepping, to try to leave organisms in the water. You're welcome to touch softly with 1 or 2 fingers. If you do turn over any rocks to find one of my favorites, the octopus, please make sure you turn them back the way you found them. The idea being that this is a really hard environment for organisms to live and survive in. And if we can help not cause more stress for these organisms, that helps their lives to be a little bit better. But I always encourage folks, always please clean up any trash that you see, any plastic or items. Some of my more interesting items have been in tide pools, you know, little plastic bits that have drifted in. But yeah, to tread lightly and to respect all the wildlife. Thanks for that.
So what do the tar seeps actually look like?
Ooh, fun question. So the bubbles, and I think, Stephanie, you dove on some bubble seeps in other spots. I dove on some doing kelp forest research in San Pedro and off of San Pedro Point, and those were actually warm. It was pretty cool. The bubble seeps just look like little bubbles coming out of the bottom, and there's several seeps. There's even, I think the researcher at UCSB calls it his bubbleology lab, Valentine, but they just look like bubbles coming out of the ground. And then the tar seeps, they're interesting. They looked more to me like a dried cow patty, just on the bottom of the sea floor. And I sat and watched them for quite a while to see if I could kind of see it in real time, like you might, you know, see like the lava flowing off into the ocean in Hawaii, but I wasn't able to see anything.
You weren't that patient, huh?
No, I guess not. Cool question, but it's kind of like a treasure hunt to try to find them.
We have 3 more questions that I found throughout the chats, and I do think we have time for them. So, is the Carpenter Reef a protected area? Is it a trench?
Oh, and I see who asked those questions, and she helped us collect data with our MPA Watch program, which looks at how people use marine protected areas and areas outside of protected areas. So Carpenter Reef is not a marine protected area. It is a beautiful kelp forest, and I've actually done quite a bit of dive work there as well. There's a high point that you can sometimes see with big swell waves breaking on, and on a calm day, it's a beautiful kayak. I've seen some incredible fish species and invertebrates out there. It's definitely worth exploring. Is it a trench? I'm not sure what that means exactly, but it has some rocky relief, more low relief, not as even as high boulders as we saw in my diving experience as not even as high as what we see at Coal Oil Point. It's much more shallow relief of the rock there, and then you get into a lot of sandy bottom. But a beautiful site, definitely worth exploring.
Other questions? What's your favorite MPA to dive?
Ooh, I don't think I can pick one. Clearly along the coast, I really enjoyed both Coal Oil Point and Naples. And then I've been fortunate to do some work with a researcher who is now retired from UCSB, but I used to get to go on cruises and dive all of the marine protected areas and non-protected areas out at the Channel Islands, doing various surveys. And so I had the rare opportunity to dive like San Miguel Island when it was like no swell and glassy conditions. And that was pretty stunning to see some of that, the colder water, more, you know, northern species. But then a good day at Anacapa, I don't know if anything beats that.
Do you prefer warm water dives, like a coral reef dive, over a kelp forest dive? What's your preference?
Yeah, so I learned to dive in Australia, and that was pretty fun. But I've done my bulk of my diving here. I think I'm a kelp forest girl.
Me too. They're so beautiful. Speaking
really
of kelp, there's a question in here. It says they haven't seen any kelp off the in the past year. Where did it go?
I wonder which site they're referring to. I do know that's a big issue up north. They're losing a lot of kelp, and we've seen these cycles happen before in the past, and especially when we've had big El Nino years, big El Nino of 80s, and then the big El Nino in the 90s. Also, Southern California lost almost 90% of its Macrocystis pyrifera, the giant kelp. And it's kind of these cycles. When we first started doing work with Channelkeeper, when I first joined Channelkeeper, we were surveying at Carpenter Reef, and the kelp was just coming back. And then it was so thick at one point, several years after that initial study and monitoring, that you had to like clear a hole in the kelp to get down diving, and it was dark under there. But I I haven't noticed that.
Let me be a little more specific. It said you mentioned kelp at Carpinteria. So I think that's what this specific.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah. I haven't been down to carp lately. Maybe you can speak to that, but I do know that there's a cyclical nature to that, and the warmer water, these warming ocean trends, the giant kelp really can't handle the warmer waters. It holds less nutrients, and the kelp starts to break down and deteriorate. So these changing ocean conditions that are happening as part of the larger climate change are definitely going to change what our local oceans look like.
You know, I know what she means. There's less probably visible, but after this last storm surge, this last weekend, or last week, there was a lot washed up on the beach. So it's got to be out there. All right. And then the last question that we have for me, maybe you see more coming up in the question and answer box, Sam, is back again to tide pool etiquette. So what's the suggested footwear to wear when tide pooling?
I think that's really a personal question. I definitely recommend protecting your feet, flip-flops, barnacles in feet, and any part of your skin and body, actually. Barnacles are quite sharp. So I'd recommend old sneakers, or even the water shoes like Chacos or something like that can work, but your toes aren't protected. One of my favorites is just old rain boots. And then if I go in beyond my, beyond the top of my boots, I got some wet feet, or booties, like surf booties are pretty protective as well and would protect your toes.
Sam, do you want to take the last question in the question and answer?
Yep, sounds good. All right, so it sounds like Karen has encountered a great white shark while paddleboarding.
Ooh, look at you.
Have you dived with one, and how was the experience if you have?
Wow. So I've always wanted to dive. There's a place where you can go diving on purpose with them, off of Guadalupe Island in Mexico. And I would love to do that one day, but I have not. I have friends that have. I also saw some of the juvenile great white sharks while stand-up paddleboarding in Carpenter Reef. And that was pretty exciting. But scuba diving, I have not seen one. The only big shark that changed the way I was calmly breathing before I saw it, I was at Catalina, and I saw a short fin, probably like an 8-foot short fin mako. And they look a lot like a great white shark. And it was solidly in the kelp forest. And there's a myth that these sharks don't go into the kelp forest. And my dive buddy at the time, we'd been seeing a lot of large leopard sharks, which are one of the most beautiful sharks, like 8 foot. And the females come in the spring to mate. And so he's like, big shark. And I was like, oh yeah, nothing. And he like shook his head and like was like, come here and look with me, you know, because you can't talk underwater. And then we sat there and we watched the shark was checking us out. It swam by through the kelp forest several times. And it was big, and I was just trying to look for features to differentiate what species of shark it was so I could try to properly identify it afterwards. But when you scuba dive, you know, it's all about like slow, calm breathing, slow inhale. And I was, my breathing got rather rapid when I saw the shark. It didn't come any closer to us, but when you have your mask on, you kind of have like tunnel vision. So then we were like, should we keep diving or do you want to go back? And I was like, I want to go back. I want to go back to shore. And so, but I kept looking over my shoulder. And then I know some research divers have seen a great white shark at Naples Reef. Some folks like to call him the landlord. So I dove there like a day or two after they'd seen it. And some of us knew and some didn't. And it was like, do you tell the other divers that there was a sighting here the other day? I also dove somewhere, it was Wyckoff Ledge, which I think is backside Santa Rosa Island. And they had seen one a few days before we were there too, but we weren't that lucky that time. So luckily the shark didn't mind. And my friends on Catalina actually went out later that day looking for the short fin mako, and they were unsuccessful. So it's a beautiful thing to see them from a safe distance, as long as they're not too curious.
Definitely. Well, that is all the questions that we have. Penny, thank you so much for joining us today so that we could dive in virtually into those marine protected areas. That was so fun. And if you want to learn more about Santa Barbara Channelkeeper, what they do, or how to get involved in your local MPAs, their website is in the chat box. And so we are going to take a quick break to actually get our lunches ready for the animals at the Sea Center, because next up We have a virtual tour of the Sea Center and a live animal feeding with our animal care team when you can see our fish get fed in that channel tank and ask our aquarist all kinds of questions about animal care and husbandry. So that's it for now, and we'll see you at 2.